That Triathlon Show 261. Hey, what's up everybody, and welcome back to another episode of That Triathlon Show, the podcast presented by scientifictriathlon.com. I'm your host Michael, and on today's episode I interview Kevin Poulton. Kevin is a world tour level cycling coach who has worked with top cyclists like Caleb Ewan, Alex Dowsett and Mat Hayman. He is also a former employee of Zwift and is incredibly knowledgeable in how to effectively incorporate indoor cycling in a training program for professionals and amateurs alike. We'll get right into the interview after thanking our sponsors, Precision Hydration, that you can find on precisionhydration.com. This week is Black Friday week, so Precision Hydration is running a special deals on their electrolyte supplements. You can get 20% off all your electrolyte supplements with the code TTSFriday20. And if you order for more than $100, then you also get a free microfiber towel. This deal is in place all the way through midnight on Cyber Monday next week on the 30th of November. Do take their free online sweat test that you can find on their website under free hydration plan. They will give you a good ballpark estimate for how much sodium you lose in your sweat, so you can match the electrolytes that you buy to your individual sweat sodium concentration. And big thank you to Roka that you can find on roka.com. Roka is running their holiday sales through the 1st of December, and you can find that on roka.com. There will be a lot of products on offer there from all the different product categories like wetsuits, tri-suits, swimskins, goggles, high-performance eyewear, and prescription glasses and sunglasses. Roka has a bunch of different product lines, and all of the products are really top quality. Of course, the normal code that you can find on roka.com/TTS is still in effect, so you can get 20% off all your order with that code, but please be aware that that's for non-sale item only. You can't combine that code with items that are on sale. But either way, since there are both plenty of sale items and there is also the usual 20% off code, there should be plenty of opportunities for you to find some really good deals. Well, there is always an opportunity with the code, of course. But now with Christmas approaching, perhaps this is a good time to get some triathlon-related gifts to your friends, family, and loved ones. So perhaps go and do some Christmas shopping this week or all the way through the 1st of December. Now, without any further ado, let's get into the interview with Kevin Poulton. Welcome to That Triathlon Show, Kevin. How are you doing today?
Yeah, good, thanks. Nice to be here.
It's very nice to have you. A topic that this time of year is very much on the agenda, with the indoor training being the primary thing we'll discuss. But before we get into all that, can you introduce yourself to the audience and tell us a bit more about yourself and your background?
Yeah, sure. My name's Kevin Poulton. I've been coaching, and I did the maths here earlier. It's coming up to around 25 years now. So starting to feel a bit older, but I guess with that comes experience. And look, I've been very fortunate to coach at a world tour level for a number of years, with head coach at Katusha, working with riders like Marcel Kittel, Alex Dowsett, had success with many Australian riders such as Mat Hayman in Paris-Roubaix. And there's the whole story of how Matt trained indoors to win Roubaix, and riders like Caleb Ewan and Mitch Docker. So a lot of experience coaching. And I guess in the last 5 years, we've really seen a shift in the technology that's come into training and the way coaches have used it as well. So, yeah, very fortunate to be coaching at a world tour level, and also part of the implementation of indoor training as well.
Yeah, so let's just mention, if you want to mention that you are working with some indoor training platforms as well, is that correct?
Yeah, so I'm working with an indoor training platform called Whoosh, WHOOSH. It's coming out of the Middle East. It hasn't quite been released yet. Look, before that, I spent a number of years with Zwift and loved every moment there. And what they've produced is fantastic. But just to give you the full background picture, I was fortunate enough to be given the opportunity to lead the development of a new indoor platform. So to have someone say, come and produce indoor training how you think it could be and should be was an opportunity I couldn't turn down. So very grateful for Zwift and everything they did for me, but took up opportunity to lead a new platform.
Yeah, that sounds very, very exciting indeed. Before we talk specifically about indoor training, could you give us an overview of your main coaching and training principles?
Yeah, so that's a broad question, that one. I guess, look, working with World Tour athletes, my main aim is to set them up for an entire season. So I guess whereas triathletes are sometimes training for 1 or 2 races and generally have a long build-up period of 16 or 20 weeks to a race, we really only have a period of 10 weeks to set us up for a season ahead. So the training is different there. And thinking about that, what I'm really trying to do with the athletes early in the season is make them as aerobically efficient as we can. So they're preserving their glycogen stores, whether they be a classics rider, a sprinter, or a climber. So for me, that early season training is really about focusing on the different training systems, energy systems. And then once we get into the season, we're then training for the demands of racing. So what we're seeing now too is that with our professional riders, in the past, they were having maybe 2 peaks throughout the season. But now someone like a sprinter, they're really having 5 or 6 peaks throughout a season. And obviously different demands of racing there. So as for a Grand Tour rider, a GC guy, they're going to have probably 2 peaks in their season. But for our sprinter, they gain their fitness early in the season, they gain their endurance, their leg speed, and they really skip along from race to race and just recover and ramp up to the next race, recover, ramp up to the next one as well. So I guess that's a really broad way to explain how we approach for professional riders. But I guess one of the biggest things that we've put in place in training in recent years is indoor training, but with that comes heat manipulation as well. And this is probably something to discuss a little bit further on in the interview, but we're really playing around with the effects of heat adaptation and the benefits of that as well, along with dietary manipulation as well. So yeah, it's a broad question there. But I guess the difference between the triathletes and the professional road cyclists is that we're preparing them for the season ahead rather than just one specific race.
Yeah, absolutely. And a couple of follow-up questions. When you are in the competitive phase, the racing part of the season, what might that typically look like when races are coming thick and fast? Do you simply, so you mentioned there, recover, build up, but quite often the races might be like very close to each other. So how much do the races actually form the training, and then it's just managing the load and not doing that much in training in terms of intensity, specific work, and how much actual hard training do you do, intense training do you do between races in those scenarios?
Yeah, so again, to be very specific in terms of the rider, so I'm fortunate enough to work mainly with the classics riders and the pure sprinters, so like the Caleb Ewans and the Mat Haymans, those guys. For our classics guys, obviously they have their period of racing, which is between 4 and 6 weeks of their peak period of racing in terms of the classics of Flanders, Roubaix, Gent-Wevelgem, those sort of races as well. So leading up to that period, and this is what we found with Mat Hayman's experience too of being forced not to race leading into a key racing period. Freshness and recovery is just obviously hugely important. We know that. But now, what we're doing now as opposed to, say, 6 years ago, we really are training less during this racing period. So the guys have a midweek semi-classic. On the weekend, they have one of the major monuments, and then the same again for the week after from there. So it really is about getting them to that peak fitness period in the best form, and the main thing is healthy. And then it really is hitting the races, doing the best they can, good recovery, one major hit out before the next race, and recovery again. So you never want to say that your work is easy, but I certainly do enjoy the racing period because in terms of programming, it really is a lot of recovery and rest days.
And in the preparation phase leading up to the racing season, you mentioned they're focusing on aerobic work, but you also mentioned working all the different energy systems. So can you just elaborate a little bit, perhaps by just giving a typical example training week? How much is aerobic training and how much of that is super easy? How much is more like high-end aerobic? How much tempo work and high-intensity intervals and so on?
Yeah, sure. So again, to use, in my experience, the classic rider versus the sprinter, in terms of volume, the sprinter is much less than the classics rider, because we know that for my pure sprinter, for the Caleb Ewan, he hits his peak 5-second power in January in Australia, but he has no endurance then. So after that, the goal really is to find some endurance but maintain that peak 5-second power as well. And that's the same with any sprinter. They're always at their best when they have the least amount of endurance. And there's that trade-off of endurance and keeping the power as well. So for someone like Caleb, it really is, the training is very low intensity or it's very high. We avoid all that medium tempo type stuff. We avoid strength endurance work of the high crank torque for long periods of time because that affects his sprint, it deadens his sprint. But whereas for the classics riders, leading into their peak racing period, it's lots of tempo work, 40-minute efforts with surges involved in it as well, huge amount of volume, but also good recovery as well. So just to be clear on that, for our sprinter, the low intensity training, they go super long. They might do 6-7 hours at zone 2, very easy. And then the anaerobic work is always very high intensity, but with good recovery as well. Whereas a classics guy, they want to build that fatigue, they want to build that resilience to be able to perform under fatigue, and lots of tempo work, lots of threshold work. They really are the jack of all trades, the classics riders, and they probably are the most difficult to train. Whereas the GC guy, the climber, lots of climbing, lots of strength work, lots of endurance. The sprinter, easy, lots of sprints. The classic rider has to be good at everything.
Yeah, absolutely. So let's move into indoor cycling a little bit. So maybe, I don't know, you can correct me on the order of these questions if you want to, because I'm sure you have a pretty logical setup of explaining your thoughts around indoor training. But what I'm thinking is maybe we can start by discussing simply equipment and setup. So what's your opinion around that?
Well, look, I guess the first point here is that setup can be expensive, but the better your setup, the more inclined you are to use it. So things like having a bike specifically for indoor training where you're not taking your road bike on and off to use it all the time. If your indoor training setup is there ready to ride when you need it, you walk down to the garage and it's raining, you want to ride indoors and the bike's there, you're more likely to use it. So if you can have a standalone setup, that's the ideal situation. Definitely smart trainer, just for the accuracy and the engagement in the workouts. There's lots of, it's all about motivating yourself and engaged in the training and things like the Wahoo climber, just to change the gradient of the bike indoors as well. Those kind of things make it more engaging and more fun. Having a good fan to keep yourself cool, which we'll talk about later on actually. Things like that. So if you can have, we call them man caves in Australia. I don't know what they're called around the world, but if you can have a good training environment, you're more likely to use it.
Yeah, and I guess that's also where the different software options come into play, because they will make it a bit more enjoyable, a bit more entertaining, and make you more likely to do the training when you have something that helps add some engagement to the training rather than just staring at your bike computer.
Yeah, I guess, look, the point there is that indoor training has been around forever. We all know that. And we've always known that it's been beneficial and effective. But now we have this system where it is motivating and fun and engaging and social. So we're more likely to use it now. And with that, we're learning how to benefit from that, how to fit it into other training. But also for me, the critical point is that indoor training complements your outdoor riding. It's not here to overtake outdoor training. It's here to allow you to train more effectively, more scientifically, more accurately, and that's going to benefit your performance outdoors.
Yeah. And of course, for a lot of people, indoor training may be the only way to train effectively, at least during a busy week with not a lot of time available, and during winter, shorter days, etc., climate not being conducive for outdoor riding. But if we have a hypothetical scenario where you have the choice between, let's say, for you guys in Australia, for example, at least in parts of Australia, you have the luxury of being able to ride outdoors year round, and it's all good weather, as far as I understand, at least in the Sunshine Coast and so on. But if you have the choice between a good outdoor riding with all the terrain you need to be specific in training outdoors, but you also have the indoor training options, what would your recommendations be in terms of distributing training between indoor and outdoor riding? Or is there any reason to do indoor training if you have a really good place to do outdoor riding year round?
Yeah, absolutely. And this is where indoor training is in some ways misunderstood at the moment. So for me, the best example is that in some of the training camps that I've run around the world, we go to places like Andorra or Lake Tahoe, beautiful places for riding outdoors. The weather's nice, the climbs are nice, the roads are quiet, everything you've described there. But the gains that we can achieve by implementing indoor training in those environments are huge. As an example, for my riders leading into Grand Tours, 3-week stage races, we've had training camps up in Andorra where we've implemented indoor training 3 or 4 times a week leading into a Grand Tour. We've done things like double-day sessions, and we do these blocks of indoor riding at our outdoor camps. And we finished the last indoor session 10 days from the start of a Grand Tour. And the guys are coming out of it with phenomenal form. And the main thing here is that one of the most interesting things is that the increase in blood plasma, the increase in VO2 that they're achieving by implementing indoor training, it can't be questioned. The gains are there. And I guess to give are you
alluding to the heat adaptation effects there?
Yeah, this is the big conversation here, and talking about heat. Look, what we've found, and this all comes back from the Mat Hayman experience. So like everyone else, before Roubaix in 2016, I had used indoor training sporadically, was aware of it, but never really implemented it unless we were forced to, whether through injury or bad weather. So in 2016, coaching Mat Hayman, the preseason has gone extremely well, good base, progressing well, nice and healthy, hits the first classic of the season, breaks his arm. And then I'm expecting Matt to ring up and say, I've broken my arm, the classics are done, let's rethink things and come back for the second part of the season. But then I get this phone call from Matt, and he says to me, I'm on this indoor trainer and this indoor platform. I'm keeping training. How are we going to use it? And so this is 6 weeks out from Roubaix. So now we have a rider that's motivated, wants to train indoors. So how are we going to use this? What we did there was for just under 6 weeks, Matt did double session days, 1.5 hours each session. So he's getting about 20 hours a week indoors. And then, as we all know, the story is he comes out, has the ride of his life, wins Roubaix. But it all comes down to, from the work that Matt did indoors, from the heat adaptation, his blood plasma and VO2 was at the highest level he'd ever experienced. And as we know, in the race in 2016, he was that aerobically efficient throughout the race that in the final 10Ks, he could overcome any attacks, he could instigate the attacks himself, and obviously produce the sprint of his life because he's preserved glycogen from being so aerobically efficient. So from that point, we've thought, okay, something's really happened here that has caused a huge benefit. Someone like Mat Hayman has had the experience of the best coaches in the world through Team Sky, Mitchelton Scott. He's experienced every training phase or fad that's come and gone. He's done everything. And all of a sudden, he's forced to ride 20 hours a week indoors for 5 weeks, and he wins Roubaix. There's got to be something positive from that experience. So from that, we've started to put in place what we've learnt from the Mat Hayman experience into our riders after that. And we know that the effects and the changes came from the increased core body temperature indoors. And we started putting these sort of ideas in place for our riders leading into some of their key races. And we came up with a bit of a system. As an example, in Strade Bianche, an Italian race in late March, sometimes the weather is quite bad there as well. So we had some of our riders performing indoor blocks of training of 10 days, with the last session 4 days before a race like Strade Bianche, one of the major classics of the season. And the guys have come out and had phenomenal rides, some of the best performances. But interestingly, people think that when we train indoors, we're training to adapt to heat in a hot environment such as Hawaii or something like that. But there's also evidence, and you can argue both ways, that when you train indoors and you get that heat adaptation, you're also more efficient at riding in cold weather as well. So in 2017, we had some of our riders training indoors leading into Strade Bianche. The weather was terrible, cold, wet, freezing, and the guys came out and had an awesome race, finishing top 5 in the race there. And their comments were that the cold didn't affect him as much as it normally does in that race today. And we know that comes from the indoor training as well. So in many ways, we were forced to learn how to use indoor training. And since then, we've put it in place in many different ways, in many different possibilities of double-day sessions, indoor training camps, leading into major races, leading into stage races. So even though the volume is reduced, the gains that we get from increased blood plasma, increased VO2, increased efficiency, they far outweigh the decrease in volume that we experience.
How much do you decrease volume when you switch to indoor riding? And I assume that the 2-a-day sessions is one of the main reasons would be just because you can't get the riders to stay engaged for 6 hours on the indoor trainer.
Yeah, well, it opens up another opportunity there when you're doing 2-a-day sessions. Sorry, my computer's just gone to sleep here. 1 second.
Yeah.
Yeah, so when we do double session days, we get the benefit of the high intensity and the heat training indoors. We then also get the opportunity to put in place dietary manipulation techniques such as low carbs for the afternoon session. So things that we were putting in place, and this varied on day to day. As an example, we might do a high intensity session in the morning, fully fueled with carbs. We would do a recover low after that session. Then in the afternoon, the rider would go and do 3 or 4 hours out in the mountains with low carbs for the endurance side of things. And that was a good way to implement heat and dietary manipulation in the one session. But then on the reverse side, we would do sometimes a double session day of ergo in the morning, ergo in the afternoon, but then from the ergo in the afternoon, straight into a hot bath to continue that heat adaptation process and the increased blood plasma. And then this is where we have this fantastic product now, which I've just got my hands on recently, where we can measure core body temperature accurately by wearing a device outside the body.
Is that the Swiss device?
Yeah, the core body temperature by GreenTeg. It's an amazing device, and the information we're getting now, because up until this point, we're guessing. And I've had my riders, I've been at camps with them, and we would do the afternoon ergo. Then they get into the hot bath straight away, and they finish the hot bath after 40 minutes or so. And then 3 hours later, they would still say, I feel like I'm cooking. I feel so hot still. And in many ways, we were just guessing, okay, how hot are they still? We really didn't know. But now we can measure that, and now we know the effects of the heat in the bath, what temperature to go to, how long to go for, how long that effects last for. It's just answering so many questions and a whole other world of training implementation as well.
Yeah. Going back to the heat adaptation with indoor training, do you think that you get those effects even when you're using a good fan, or do you turn the fans off, or how do you implement that practically?
Yeah, this has been the interesting thing. And I read an article just the other day, and the title was Beat the Heat. And I read that and I thought it really should be Embrace the Heat. Like, up to a certain point, we're going to get a benefit from it. Obviously, if you go too hot, there's the danger and also the decreased performance as well. But to get to that point where it's dangerous or decreased performance indoors, it's pretty hard to get to that point. So I really say embrace the heat. And since I had my hands on this core body temperature device from GreenTeg, we've been experimenting with things like which thermoregulation method is more effective, evaporation or convection. And we've come up with models now of certain riders will ride without a fan, relying on evaporation only until they get to a certain core body temperature. So as an example, some riders are getting to 38.3 and then turning the fan on because they get to the point where the sweat isn't drying on their skin, so they're losing the effect of the evaporation. And then from that point, they're turning the fan on. And then we're seeing the difference in skin temperature and core body temperature. And it's like when you first got heart rate monitors. It's a whole nother level of training implementation and ideas to put forward.
Yeah. And the other thing I wanted to ask around, coming back to one thing that we didn't quite cover yet was the volume difference. So you said that you do reduce volume a bit when implementing indoor training protocols. So how much roughly would that be that you reduce the volume?
Sorry about that. So as an example, leading into a Grand Tour, normally a GC rider is aiming to complete consecutive weeks of around 30 hours, 28 to 33. And the gold standard for a GC rider in a Grand Tour that's aiming to finish top 10, they should be able to complete about that 30 hours a week of high volume, low intensity aerobic work, 2 weeks of that. When we then come in closer to the race period, we're reducing that volume with the implementation of indoor training down to around 18 to 22 hours of training, including the indoor riding as well. So the volume can be decreased quite a bit, and we're just getting more gains by placing the body under more stress and different stress as well in terms of the heat and also the dietary manipulation.
And how much do you think is the, if you want to call it, the minimal effective dose of indoor training to get these adaptations you're seeking? And where do you usually place, like how much indoor training would you prescribe on average?
So for a professional rider, obviously we need periods of big volume, and we're doing these indoor blocks very specifically leading into key races. So leading into a key race, they've done their volume, they've had a good rest period, and they're looking for the intensity as well. So we normally put them in place in blocks of 10 days of indoor training being used. In that 10-day block, we implement the double-day sessions, the hot baths as well. We normally have 1 day off of each method during that 10 days. So there might be 1 day off of a hot bath and 1 day with no ergo as well, just to give them a mental break from it as well. But it's been interesting to see the uptake on these methods, and to the point where when I first went to Andorra with a rider and turned up with the indoor trainer, and this is a person that just basically hated indoor riding. Didn't want a bar of it, didn't want to even try it. But I got them through their first experience of indoor training while we're in Andorra at altitude, beautiful riding. We did the indoor ergo, the hot baths. They then went to their professional team, and before each Grand Tour, they always take blood values to monitor the rider's health and so on. And his team came back and said to him that his blood values were the best they'd ever seen, and they'd been with the same team for 5 or 6 years. So just that last block that we did at altitude with the heat, with the dietary manipulation and the baths, it just really gave the rider a massive boost in performance. They went on to have a magnificent performance in the Vuelta, the Tour of Spain. And from that point on, this rider now comes back to me and says, okay, it's time to put in place another indoor block, and they ask for it now. So that's an example of, once you've experienced the benefits of it and the gains, people become believers in it, and they want to implement it themselves when they can.
Yeah, no, that makes total sense. Now, when it comes to training indoors, depending on the rider, you might have a smaller or a bigger difference in power production, for example, but also you have other things that you need to consider, like different hydration needs, perhaps. So can we go into some of these considerations that need to be put in place when implementing indoor training?
Yeah, in terms of the difference in power that is produced, riders are producing more power indoors, whether that's through just the ability to produce a long 1 hour effort. As an example, during lockdown, with all the racing that was happening with professional riders on different platforms, a lot of the riders were coming out and doing their best 1 hour power all the time. That comes down to obviously the environment, the power meter that's being used. Obviously, there's some discrepancies there as well. But all in all, we're seeing huge or a positive trend in power produced indoors. I think it's because there's the ability to have just a constant torque on the cranks, a constant incline, and they can do some of their best power. Also, when you're racing your peers indoors and everyone's watching it, you're more motivated as well. So in terms of the power that's produced over the course of 1 hour, you're not going to see huge differences. It should be pretty similar to what you do outdoors, unless when you get down to under 20 seconds where the sprinting ability isn't quite the same because you can't throw the bike around as much. So someone like Caleb's not going to get his best 5-second power indoors. That needs to be done outdoors. But for the longer efforts, definitely comparable and really no decline in performance as well over the course of 1 hour. But getting back to hydration, it's an opportunity to really measure the effects of your effort and the environment, and how it affects your sweat rates. You can do so many of your own little science experiments when you're riding indoors, just measuring how much fluid you take on, weighing before and after, and then applying that to outdoors as well. So it allows everyone to become a sports scientist and measure things accurately.
Yeah. What you say about power production is very interesting. I've heard as much about the pro cyclist, but it does go against what I see in quite a lot of amateur athletes, triathletes and cyclists, in that many of them, when they start indoor training, they actually see a significant decrease in power output. And perhaps this has to do with just first getting familiar with training indoors. And I think that there is definitely you adapt to it, and then you are producing just as much power indoors as outdoors, and you say perhaps even more. But you say it doesn't sound like you see that need for an adaptation period with the professional riders. So I'm wondering if you have any opinion on why amateurs might see at first a huge discrepancy in terms of smaller power production indoors versus outdoors.
I think it comes down to RPE, rate of perceived exertion, where also comes down to the method they're using to complete the workout. So this is the conversation about to use erg mode or not erg mode. So obviously erg mode is when the trainer sets the power and you just pedal and reach it regardless, or without erg mode, you've got to find the power yourself. So I guess perhaps when an amateur rider is doing workouts indoors and the target power is there, and they're using erg mode, maybe they're not riding at the cadence they're more familiar with, or they're not used to that sensation of how hot they think they are, which raises a point that generally indoors people think they're very hot. They're actually not that hot as what they think they are. So this is where the green tag device from Core Body Temperature is really interesting to put in place as well. But I would then say that when we do intervals, free ride intervals where there's no power ceiling, this is where riders are then going to be able to achieve similar power to what they produce outdoors. So when you're doing intervals, because it's more structured, more constraints on how you produce that, they might not feel they're getting the same power for the same effort. But when they do free ride intervals with no ceiling and no restrictions on cadence or how you produce that power, they're more likely to be able to achieve the same power as what they do outdoors.
Yeah, I would, just from personal experience, agree with that. In erg mode, perhaps it's good in a way if you're doing, like, for example, longer tempo intervals, because you can just stay very constant and not have fluctuations if that is the goal of the session. So you're kind of very efficient in the way that you're not wasting any energy to power spikes and so on. But I do think especially when you're doing high intensity intervals, erg mode can sort of, like, it feels like our RPE goes up because it feels like it's pushing against you much more than when you're just in the normal resistance mode or free ride mode. So for that type of riding and for whenever you want to, like, hit a KOM or something like that, then I agree that probably to get the most power out of yourself, you need to be in that free ride or resistance mode.
We could probably do a whole podcast on to erg mode or not to erg mode. People are very adamant that their way is right. But I guess in my example with my riders, I let them choose themselves. Look, the outcome is very similar. But if the rider is more motivated to train indoors with their preferred method, let them go for it.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And when we're talking about the difference between amateurs, or if we no, sorry, let me rephrase the questions. How might the training differ for an amateur cyclist or triathlete that are training indoors through the winter in a cold weather climate compared to a triathlete or cyclist, amateur triathlete or cyclist who can ride outdoors year round? So if you're stuck, you have to do all of your training indoors essentially because of the climate. Would you say that there is a difference? Like, would you still have them do, if they're motivated enough to do that, to do long rides indoors, or are there any differences that you would put in place for these amateurs?
Yeah, there is, and this is where there's the latest methods of. This is all about mitochondria and how to increase the efficiency and the number of mitochondria in our bodies. So, if we have the option to ride outdoors, we need to go easier and longer. When we ride indoors, we're not going to do 4 or 5 hours indoors regularly. We might do a one-off ride like that occasionally, but to get a similar kind of response to increased mitochondria, if we're just doing short surges where your breathing rate increases. So if you're doing a nice zone 2 ride and every 5 minutes you're just doing a little acceleration to the point that you feel your breathing rate increase suddenly and then back it off and recover from there, just that slight increase in intensity without going overboard is enough to stimulate a response to increased mitochondria. And that's the kind of thing that we can do indoors during the winter as well. So for triathletes that have to spend their winters indoors, it doesn't just mean hours and hours of zone 2. You can do some accelerations, mix it up a bit, 6 seconds, 20 seconds, good recovery in between, and get a very similar response to riding outdoors for the longer steady state efforts.
Yeah, that is really interesting. Do you, off the top of your head, know who might have done research studies on this that I can look up and link to in the show notes? Or
off the top of my head, I don't. But there was a paper a long time ago, and it spoke about the sodium potassium pump and how that regulates itself and how efficient it can be in terms of recharging the muscle cells. And when we look at cyclists, and when they race, a 4 or 5 day tour, and the conversation was, are they getting the increased benefit from the volume or is it from the intensity? And what they've found is that it really is from when they're riding in the bunch, there's lots of freewheeling and lots of short accelerations without going into any sort of oxygen debt. And that's where they're getting the benefit from in terms of their fitness and their endurance. So we're applying the same principles to indoor training as well.
Yeah. All right. And back to the question around, or the topic around long rides on the indoor trainer. I don't know if this is something that is more of a triathlete thing, but I've had the fortune of, well, actually, I can probably count myself among these athletes, but I've also coached several triathletes that have no problem whatsoever with doing a 4 or 5 hour ride every single week of the year on the indoor trainer. So in your opinion, if you have the mental fortitude and the motivation to do that, is it still useful to do that sort of just long, steady ride indoors? Or would you still, I mean, I think from a coaching perspective, I still try to make a 5 hour ride like that have something in it to make it a bit more engaging and varied. It's not just put on an erg mode and go at 5 hours for one single power. Mm-hmm. But what is your general opinion around doing really long rides on the indoor trainer if the motivation is there to do so?
Oh, if the motivation's there, go for it, do it. And to put this politely, triathletes are, I guess, I don't want to say more mentally stronger, but yeah, there seems to be the culture of if the ride requires 5 hours, I'm going to do it indoors or outdoors. Whereas road cyclists are more likely to say 2 hours is enough for me. That's all I'm going to do indoors. So I think it's just a different culture between the two fraternities there. But hats off to all the triathletes doing 5 hours indoors. I think it's an amazing feat. But this is where, with the indoor platforms we have available now, it can be engaging and fun, and you can do social rides, and there's all these challenges of 200-kilometer rides, or there's lots of bunch rides happening as well. So yeah, there certainly is the environment there to do it now. I would imagine that before this world of indoor training, 5 hours on the ergo, would be completed by very few triathletes or cyclists, but with the implementation of these indoor platforms, the environment is there now to achieve this.
Yeah. And let's talk a bit about those bunch rides, races, and so on. What's your general opinion around how that can be implemented in a training program when the main goal isn't the indoor racing, but it's either outdoor road races or triathlons or whatever the athlete is training for? But can we still implement effectively things like races and maybe group workouts and stuff like that?
Yeah, look, the races provide the ideal opportunity for unstructured high intensity. So the rider is motivated to push hard. Generally, these rides or these races indoors are quite steady state. There's not a whole lot of attacking. They're more of a race of attrition, which would probably suit triathletes. But either way, it's just a way to motivate the athlete to train without a ceiling of power and really produce their best performance. They're engaging, they're fun. I do read and hear comments about racing indoors is detrimental to performance. I don't believe that for a second. If you put it in place in the correct training format or the correct timing, there's gains to be made there. Obviously, if you're racing 5 days a week, it's going to be a decreased performance there. But if you put racing indoors into the right training plan in the right place, there's definitely gains to be made there. And this sort of comes back to the conversation too about how much recovery is required from indoor training. Most people are training for 1 hour sessions at a time. And during the week, they might do 4 or 5 indoor workouts of 1 hour. I think it's okay to do 1 hour of high intensity 4 or 5 times a week. With an hour, we're not going to see huge amounts of fatigue. But then following on from that, this also leads into the conversation about the metrics that we have to monitor fatigue that are out there haven't really accounted for this volume of indoor training. So, for example, during lockdown, the riders that were doing double sessions indoors, they're doing 14, 15 hours a week indoors, we were getting nowhere near the same levels of fatigue, even though the intensity was higher, as they would if they were training outdoors. So I think this is kind of
in terms of metrics or in terms of actual fatigue?
In terms of metrics. Fatigue. So I think what we've been forced to look at is how reliable are our metrics when someone is training indoors with high volume. I would say that we're not quite keeping up with what the athlete is feeling or seeing, and this comes from experience with all the athletes that were training in lockdown, double sessions, high intensity. And from my side, normally as a coach, you want to see in the data the same thing that the rider is feeling, and that's normally the case. But during lockdown, I was seeing the rider was fresh, ready to go again. But in terms of the way they were feeling, they weren't feeling quite the same as well. So it sort of highlighted a discrepancy there.
Yeah. And were you looking at things like the PMC there mostly, or what other metrics might you have been using to assess that? Yeah,
look, just our standard performance management chart metrics there. And look, I guess to give examples for our road riders, we'd normally push them down to minus 60 or 70 at a very extreme point. And we would achieve that with high volume outdoors. But with the same volume indoors and more intensity, they're only going down to minus 20, minus 30. But they were feeling the fatigue was much more than what the metrics were showing there as well. So for me, it's something for us to investigate and look a bit further at. It could be because the effort is more stochastic perhaps, and the way they're pedaling indoors. And we know that these metrics don't really count for efforts under 30 seconds. Maybe it's missing that point of it, lots of that. But I just think it's something that needs further investigation.
Yeah. So I'm going to put you here a bit on the spot here. If you were to design a template winter training week for an amateur cyclist, so we're talking about cycling here now, not triathlon, and they have 60 to 90 minutes on weekdays to train, and then they have let's say up to 3 hours on the weekends, but they're basically stuck on a trainer because they live in somewhere cold and snowy and dark. What might a template week look like in broad strokes?
Okay,
and it can include races and bunch workouts and stuff like that as well.
Yeah, well, that's what I was going to say. Look, obviously very broad because we need to look at the timing of the training and the season and so on. But this is where if the rider is in some ways forced to train indoors, but I would hope they would embrace it and look forward to it eventually. Definitely use the motivation of socializing indoors. So include some structure. So I would include perhaps 2 specific sessions that target the changes we're looking for in the athlete, and then perhaps a race for that unstructured high intensity and some sort of social group ride throughout the week. And then the weekend, with our amateur riders, we know that if they can normally they're training between, let's say, 7 to 10 hours a week. That gives them an hour a day and a long one on the weekend. If they can train with intensity during the week, with some structure and some recovery, and then if they can go longer on the weekend, that long ride really produces some big gains for the rider. So, yeah, I guess in broad strokes, embrace the ability to engage with others indoors with the racing and the social rides. Do some specific workouts for the needs of the athlete on the weekend, long and slow.
In terms of training and distribution, I'm getting a picture here that you're not really into things like polarized training that is kind of trendy these days, but it sounds like you're okay with doing much more intensity than that sort of training intensity distribution would have an athlete do. Is that correct?
Perhaps not. So I've thought about this question before. What I found that if I look at the riders' training I've set them during the year, at some points they're doing a traditional periodization training, and at some points they are doing a polarized type training as well. So leading into some events, they might implement that sort of method as well. So I've never really used the one method throughout the entire season. It really depends on the timing of the season and the races and what those needs are. Like in some ways, once the rider's fit, we sort of put in place this block training where we're doing 2 weeks of maintenance aerobic work, 1 week of high intensity, and then another 2 weeks of low intensity endurance. Then we're into a racing period again. So what I find is that leading up to the first racing block of the season, we put in place the more traditional periodization training. And then once the racing season starts, we're really adapting quite quickly to the periods of training we have available. Sometimes it's a 6-week mid-season build, or sometimes it's a 2-week break that the rider has in between some key racing periods. So for the professional riders, it changes quite a bit.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, that makes sense. So looking at if you look at the longer term view, I guess then it can maybe add up a bit more because you have those weeks with lower intensity training as well. But yeah, not. I guess the main point there is that it changes based on the current needs, and it's not a fixed philosophy, which makes total sense.
Yeah.
One more thing around indoor training: if you have somebody either who just needs to do some time trial training because that's their specialty on the world tour, or just an amateur, hypothetically, that's focusing on time trials, or triathlete, how much would you think that they would need to train in a TT position indoors? Again, assuming that they live in a cold climate where they basically do all of their training as indoors through the winter period, or would it be okay to mix in sitting up in some workouts? What would you have as general recommendations around that?
Look, generally, I would mix it up, but the best example I can give here is with Alex Dowsett training for the world's time trial last year. He was in Andorra, I was in Australia, and we were using things like best bike split, obviously training peaks and indoor training as well to replicate the demands of the race. And what we put in place there was for his training that was simulating the demands of the race. So we would not always train with the same intensity, but we had a workout that was comprised of, it was 48 intervals over an hour and 5 minutes, which was what the race was going to be. we wanted him just to get used to the rhythm of the race. So an opening, pretty much flat 15-minute effort, then the rolling hills after that, and the steep climbs at the end. So we wanted him to attune himself to the rhythm of that race with lower intensity so he could repeat it. For those efforts, we were using the time trial position, but whereas for other sessions, we were looking just for the gains in heat adaptation and so on, he would train on his normal bike. So we were mixing it up between his road bike and his time trial bike indoors.
Yeah. And how often would you have that key session? Like, so basically in one training week, how often would he be training on the TT bike?
At that point, leading up to the Worlds, we had a really specific 5-week block of training, and we were on the time trial bike on the ergo 2 or 3 times a week at that point. But mid-season, it would just be once a week at the most.
All right. Do you have any other cool entertainment tips for indoor training? Like, for example, do you have athletes that in addition to or instead of using some platforms, just have found it music or watching some YouTube channels, GCN or whatever? Anything else that from your coaching experience seems to be working well to keep indoor training engaging and entertaining?
I've got a good example for this. So during lockdown this season, one of my riders from Katusha, Vili Smith, South African, he rode 1,000 kilometers continuously indoors. It took him 37 hours. And I asked him after he had done it, I said, what did you watch while you were riding that distance? How did you entertain yourself? And he said, I was watching my speed for 37 hours. So the point there is that everyone's different, and Willie's very different, but it really is an individual thing. So I guess if the session is more intricate, entertaining, the rider needs to focus on that, and that's normally enough to entertain them. For the longer endurance free ride things, it really is up to the athlete's choice, documentaries, music, those sort of things as well. But that kind of leads on to a point about indoor training, which we're seeing happening in this landscape now in terms of the training plans indoors. There's this real conundrum of how do we entertain the rider but also train them effectively. So if you're training indoors 4 or 5 times a week, you want to be entertained. But whereas as coaches, we know that doing 2 30-minute tempo efforts is good training and very efficient. To do that indoors is not much fun. So what we're seeing now is that people are becoming very adventurous in their interval setups and perhaps are missing the mark of training physiology now, and it's more entertainment. So I guess a bit of a tip or advice here is that if you look at a training workout, the one that is more colourful, has the most chart intervals up and down, is not always the best training. Look for the science behind it and ask your coach why you're doing this session, what's the goal of it, because there is a blur between entertainment and good training now as well.
Well, that is an amazing point, Kevin. I couldn't agree more. And that's, again, where I think that, well, it's in some ways I'm lucky coaching triathletes because they have no problem doing just 20s or 30s of just one steady tempo power. So really, personally, I don't have to worry about that at all. The session can be plain and boring and they get it done. But yeah, I totally agree. Like you see plans and platforms that have workouts that look like a physics formula or something like that, it is very easy to miss the mark when you try to add too much entertainment to it. So yeah. All right. So I have some other questions unrelated to or partially related to indoor training, but I guess more general training and coaching that I was wondering if you can give some tips and insights on. And the first one would be how you're using and combining power, heart rate, and RPE as measures of intensity in training and coaching.
Yeah, I'm of the belief that the more we measure, the less we guess. And as I mentioned, we have this new core body temperature device. We can measure another metric now. We're measuring HRV as well as heart rate and power and RPE. I would never make a decision based on just one metric. So I'm always looking at the trends of all these metrics. And if they're all heading in the same direction, we can make a better informed decision. But if something is going against the grain, we can probably discount that as well. So I really am a believer in asking the athlete about RPE. Look, I use Training Peaks for my communication with athletes, and I always look for the two markers from their session, their RPE score and the little emoji face on how they felt. Those two things tell the coach, a whole story almost. So what I was expecting the athlete to feel should line up with what they supply in that Training Peaks metric there. But look, yeah, definitely with indoor training specifically, looking at heart rate drift for steady state efforts, looking at the effect of heat on that as well now. We're seeing how obviously the point here is that when riders feel that they're hot and cooking, quite often they aren't. And so the heart rate drift isn't as much. So it's a good way to measure heart rate drift against body temperature now as well. That's something we're looking at there. But obviously power is probably the most important metric that we look at.
Power is what you prescribe sessions by, I assume.
Yeah, again, that's what I look for. But again, it's about engaging the athlete. So I'm looking for power. And this is where, as coaches, we need to get the athlete's trust and get them on board. I had a young Australian that went to Europe to race professionally. I would set intervals based on power. He just couldn't get his head around it, despised it, didn't like it. And so we went back to basically simply go hard, harder, hardest. But if you set an athlete 3 by 10 minutes and you say, go as hard as you can, they can pretty much regulate their effort to what you're expecting from the power at the same time as well. So it sort of works both ways there. I'm always looking at the power, but we don't always prescribe it to the athlete is probably the point there.
All right. And next topic, high intensity interval training.
Yeah, look, I love it. I'm a fan of it. But depending on the athlete, and this brings us into the conversation of what Sebastian Weber's now doing with INSCYD. And this is a whole new language of training and a whole new world of how we prescribe training to athletes. What we're seeing with these metrics now of VLA max and VO2 and threshold power and so on is how the rider responds to those and what type of rider they are as well. So high intensity training is great for the right rider. The example I can give here is that for someone like Caleb Ewan, obviously he responds, he produces lots of lactate from his short sprints, which is what he wants. But then we sometimes see that if a rider doesn't have a very high 5-second power, the coach will prescribe them massive amounts of sprint work, but the athlete's not going to respond to that because they don't produce lactate. So using the INSCYD metrics and validation there, we can now see what sort of training the rider should put in place to be able to increase the lactate they produce to produce that power there as well. So this is leading on to a whole other conversation here about how we're moving away from just talking about FTP, and now we really are training for the demands of the event and prescribing the most effective training to that rider as well. So as we know, for our GC riders, they want to have a lower VLA max, and our sprinter wants to have a higher VLA max, and what training is going to allow them to achieve that. And this is a conversation far beyond FTP now.
Yeah, Sebastian has been on the podcast several times before, but just from your perspective, if we take those two examples, first the GC rider and working towards lowering a VLA max, what would some key training interventions be? And it can be other interventions, nutrition perhaps even, be to do that?
Yeah, well, this is where, the tempo type work and the low fuel is going to decrease the VLA max. So for our triathlete that needs to go long and steady for a long period of time, they're going to be performing that tempo work and maybe lowering the carb intake as well. Just a quick note on carb intake. We now know that no carbs is not the way to go. We want some carbs in there. Otherwise, we're going to do probably more damage than good. But in terms of someone like my Caleb Ewan sprinter, if he does a lot of tempo work, particularly when he's forced to in racing, that affects his sprint in a negative way. So we avoid that as much as we can. We're going either side of that. We're going very easy and long, or we're going super high lactate and very high power stuff there as well.
So you mentioned there a little bit before that if you have an athlete that basically the coach wants to increase their 5-second power, but they're giving them a lot of high power work, but they don't respond to that because they don't produce lactate, what would the solution be to that? Like is it just like going short enough and hard enough, or is there more of a 30-second repeats that produce more lactate? Would you have them do some gym work perhaps that is designed to be very glycolytic?
Yeah, no, you've hit the nail on the head there. So for these riders, they haven't got the fast twitch fibers to produce that power, and they don't produce that lactate. So they need to do lots of repetitive 20-second, 30-second efforts with short recovery to keep building that lactate up higher and higher and higher on each effort there. If they do gym work, they probably aren't going to respond as well as someone with fast twitch fibers. So it really is about knowing what type of athlete that you have in your hands there and how they're going to respond to producing lactate. So as an example, someone like my Caleb Sprinter or Marcel Kittel, in 20 seconds, they're going to produce 12 to 17 millimoles of lactate. But whereas someone with a low amount of fast twitch fibers, they're going to produce 6 or 7. So they need to keep producing that extended 20 or 30-second effort repeatedly with short recovery period to keep building the lactate levels up. And from that, they're going to increase their anaerobic ability there. So I guess for the not the slower the athlete, but the lower fast twitch fiber athletes, they need to produce a bit longer effort with a short recovery and repeat that many times to increase the lactate levels there.
Do you have any other tips around, like if you have an athlete that is very slow twitch versus fast twitch or vice versa, other differences to consider, for example, differences in recovery times, maybe needs for different tapering protocols, and anything there you want to mention regarding those two different phenotypes?
Yeah, well, I guess I'm always looking at the example of the pure sprinter, and we're talking our top 5 sprinters in the world, like our Marcels and our Calebs and how they train. And look, I'm guilty of 6-7 years ago having these guys produce long, what I thought was high crank torque efforts at the time for 15, 20 minutes at a time. And completely the wrong thing to do. And we know now with these new measurements, we know the effects of that training, and it's thanks to things like INSCYD and the ability to measure VLA max, we can see the detrimental effect that it has. So in terms of our sprinters, when we produce our strength endurance days, it really is very high power for a short amount of time. We're just aiming to recruit the maximal amount of fast twitch fibers as we can in a short period of time. So we're doing 30 seconds, 45 seconds at extremely high power, and then good recovery after that. Whereas for our time trialers, our triathletes, to train those fast twitch fibers, they want to produce high crank torque for long periods of time. Like we're really talking 40 minutes if you can, whether that be on the ergo indoors or a long climb. That way you're going to fatigue the muscles to a point where they're going to respond and adapt.
Yeah, for those guys, for the GC guys, you want to make sure that as many of the fast twitch fibers as possible or have as good endurance as possible. Whereas for the sprinters, you just want to make sure that you keep having a maximum available pool of muscle fibers by actually recruiting them in the first place, and that's why you have like a really, really high power, but only for short periods of time. Is that correct?
Yeah, definitely, absolutely.
Right. So threshold training and maybe also tempo training. You have mentioned some of the things already, so we don't need to go into depth here, but well, maybe just specifically around training right around threshold or FTP. Do you have any specific opinions around that?
Again, thanks to INSCYD, we can now measure the effects of that. And to use our sprinter as an example again, we avoid that because to increase their sprintability, we want to decrease their threshold. So I guess we do monitor it, but we don't train that system, so we know to avoid it. And again, this is where FTP, we're really moving away from that as being a focus of our training and our riders. Look, even obviously for someone like our Alex Dowsett, a world-class time trial, our record holder, it's crucial to them. But for the the extreme of our GC guy to our sprinter to our classics rider, FTP plays a part in their performance. Whether you're training to increase it or decrease it, that's what we're looking at now, and we can measure that accurately now thanks to INSCYD.
But training there for somebody like Alex Dowsett or somebody, a GC guy, is that beneficial, or is it more beneficial, in your opinion, to focus more on either doing, endurance work or tempo work, or going the other end and doing some high intensity work?
Okay, yeah, great. So it really is all about that lactate level there. So for someone like our time trial rider who's training for an hour time trial, what we do there is we do a big preload effort of between 3 and 5 minutes, well above threshold, to build up lactate. And then we have a short recovery of 1 or 2 minutes. And then we're shuttling the lactate up or down. So that way we get to keep the athlete at a high level of lactate for a longer period without the strain and stress of a continuous effort where lactate is gradually going up and up and up and performance decreases. So in training, it's about training the body to adapt to utilizing that lactate that is produced at that time trial level. And we do that by building it up first at a high level, and then we can go above and below it for a longer period of time. But this is also where it depends on the athlete on which method you're going to use. So that's for a GC guy, I'd be putting in place, or a triathlete perhaps, the method of the big effort first, or 3 to 5 minutes of a VO2 effort. Think of it that way. And then shuttling above and below threshold on 2-minute blocks after that. But whereas someone like a sprinter who might be doing some shorter threshold work, they wouldn't do the preload session, the preload effort, because it builds up too much lactate, and that's detrimental to performance. So it really is about looking at lactate levels there and how to best utilize that.
And when you have that shuttling period after the first preload, then the over-unders, if we call them that, the unders there would be quite significantly below threshold, I assume, and then the overs would be a bit above, I don't know, maybe 105, 110% going down to 80% or something to that effect. Or
yeah, exactly. Yeah. The recovery is very easy, and the on interval is 105, 106%. But again, getting back to what we can measure in this INSCYD method, we can measure how much lactate will accumulate in the athlete for a certain power for a certain duration, and this way everything is very accurate.
Yeah, exactly. That's also a way that I do over-unders, but I think this is a very common misconception around over-unders. You see a lot of programs that do over-unders where the unders are at 95%, but actually you're not as, you don't have as much capability of actually metabolizing that lactate. So it was good too.
Yeah, I agree. Because if they're doing that, then the lactate's not going to clear as much, and the lactate's going to keep building up higher and higher. So it really is all about keeping that lactate level around 4 to 6 millimoles for the longest period of time that you can.
And you're right. I should have said clearing lactate and not metabolizing, because you're still metabolizing as much or more lactate at that level. But good. And one more point here, which you already mentioned a bit, the nutritional interventions. You had the double days with the second one in a low glycogen state. Can you elaborate a bit on that? So when you do that first high intensity workout in the morning, and then you don't have a lot of carbs, and you go out and do a second workout, an endurance ride in the mountains, perhaps 3 hours, I think you mentioned. Do you do that completely without energy, or do you take on some energy during that ride?
No, so we take on some energy. So again, I'm a big fan of double day sessions. Not all season long, just coming into key racing periods. A good block of double day sessions has a very good effect for the athlete. And one of the methods that we've mentioned here is the high intensity ergo in the morning. So the rider will wake up and they'll have a good carb breakfast. They'll do their high intensity ergo session of an hour 20 thereabouts. After that session, they will have no carbs, but they'll take calories on board, proteins and fats. And then at lunch, they'll avoid carbohydrates, just have proteins and fats. Then for the afternoon endurance session, they're in a depleted carb state, particularly intramuscular wise. And then out on the road, they won't go no carb, but they'll take on probably 10 to 20 grams of carbs per hour for a 3 or 4 hour ride. So this is a conversation in itself about carb intake and going training low and so on. But we've found that for the rider to stay healthy and adapt to the stress as well, taking a minimal amount of carbs on board just avoids any detrimental performance or detrimental effect of the training. So that's one way. And with carb manipulation, we really only do it once or twice at the most in a week. If people are doing it day in and day out, this becomes too much and fatigue sets in. The response is just not possible from training. Carbs are good, we need carbs to perform. But we've learned it once or twice in the week is one of the most effective ways. The other way we look at carb manipulation is if the rider is doing endurance day on day one, they might do intensive work in an endurance session. For our guys, 4 or 5 mountains that are doing a few sets of VO2 work. Late in the session, they'll start taking carbs on board. And then for dinner again, they'll go carbs, they'll just go fats and proteins as well. And then the most important session, the next day session, they'll wake up, again, they'll have a minimal amount of carbs, 10 to 20 grams in the meal there. Then they'll go out and do some longer steady state work, tempo work, or blocks of 10 to 15 minutes in a low carb state. Then immediately after training, they're going to refuel with a good amount of carbs as well. So that's one way to look at over a 2-day period.
Yeah. And one other question is, so you mentioned that you do this in specific blocks. So in a block such as that, how many times would you do low carb training, and how many of these blocks might you have in a year? So just to get a perspective of the overall season, how much low carb training are you actually doing? For example, is it twice a week for like 5 to 7 2 or 3 week blocks throughout the season, or is it 4 times per week for more blocks than that? If you understand the perspective that I'm coming from here with the question.
Yeah. Look, I guess again for more professional riders in the early season in their base training, that's when we do the most carb manipulation work there. So in our 8-week build up until Tour Down Under, we'll probably do carb manipulation twice a week for 6 weeks or 7 weeks thereabouts. And this is where the riders get their most gain in aerobic efficiency in their endurance capabilities, and it comes from the carb manipulation there. Once they start racing, they need the carbs to perform and to recover as well, so we don't use it as much. We might use it again in a mid-season build up to a Grand Tour, but it probably really is only 2 big blocks of training where we're putting it in place twice a week. But once racing starts, we want to take the carbs on board.
Right. Now, what are a few 1 to 3 common mistakes related to any aspect of endurance training that you see athletes doing regularly, and that you would advise our listeners to avoid, and how should they avoid these common mistakes?
I guess we probably just mentioned one then about doing too many train low days. They have become a bit of a fad. They're obviously very effective used in the right place and the right timing, so just not day in and day out. One of the biggest ones I see amateur athletes putting in place is a set recovery day. If they have good training history, good training data, and they can look at their metrics with confidence, if a rider is putting in place a set training day when they don't need it, over the course of a season, they could be missing out on 20 days of training that they could have been training effectively and made a gain in performance there. And so we're looking at almost a month of training they could miss in a season. So I really encourage riders to look at their trends in data in terms of their fatigue and their TSB and those sort of metrics, and just give themselves a target point of when they're going to back off training. And so if they can fit in an extra session a week, there really is some gains to be made there. So using metrics and a question about whether you should have a set day off or not. I guess the other one there is really looking at your blocks of racing and how long you want your racing your peak period to be. And this is where the difference between triathletes and our races, road races, is different, where if you're training for one event, you can be a bit more haphazard with the volume as such. So what we find is that the bigger the volume the rider has, the more specifically you can target when they're going to be in their peak form. But when they have a bit less, it's a bit harder to say that they're going to be on peak form on this specific day. So really look at the volume you're putting in place and play around with that as well.
All right. And what are a couple of things, 1 to 3 things, again, that you're currently really fascinated by, learning more about, or have started to implement in the last, however short time or long time frame you want to talk about? It's an open-ended question, but yeah, some things that you're currently fascinated by and learning more about. You probably mentioned a couple of them already.
Yeah, obviously I've mentioned the core body temperature measurement, hugely fascinating, and they're things that we've known through reading all the scientific papers and the science, but now to be able to put it in place with the athlete and for them to experience it themselves, they just really buy into the whole methodology, and they really take all the advice on board. So for me, this is going to be like when we first got heart rate monitors back in the day, and it was a whole new language of talking about heart rate zones and how it would respond and how it was delayed and so on. So this we're working towards a protocol for heat training, in terms of saying when you first start training indoors or outdoors, up to this temperature, safe and no benefit. At this temperature, there's now a benefit to performance to be gained by training this temperature. And at this temperature, maybe you're starting to see detrimental performance when riding. And at a certain temperature above that, obviously dangerous and back things off. So we're trying to now put in place a testing protocol based on core body temperature, which is something which will be quite fascinating and I'm sure interesting to all our users there as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Now let's move into the rapid fire questions. So take just one sentence to answer these. And the first one is, what's your favorite book, blog, or resource related to endurance sports?
I mainly read scientific journals, so nothing specifically in terms of books that I read. I'm just basically reading journals as much as I can.
Perfect. And what's your favorite piece of gear or equipment?
At the moment, it's the core body temperature device.
And what's a personal habit that's helped you achieve success?
Just supporting the athlete and knowing that you're lucky to work with them because they get one career and they've chosen you. So just really being along with them for the ride and just doing the best that you can.
All right. Thank you so much, Kevin. This has been great. Before we go, tell the listeners where they can follow you, if you have social media, websites, and other places that are good to check out.
Yeah, I guess on Twitter and Instagram, it's at Kev Poulton, Poulton.
Perfect. And thank you once again for coming on and sharing all this knowledge. It's been really, really interesting to hear what you're doing with the athletes. Great to get insights from the World Tour level. So thank you very much from me and on behalf of all our listeners.
Great. Thanks for having me.
I hope that you enjoyed that interview. As always, you can find the show notes on scientifictriathlon.com with links to a number of related topics and the pages, including Whoosh, the indoor cycling platform that Kevin is working on, the core body temperature device, and so on. Also, one thing that I haven't really mentioned yet is that now on scientifictriathlon.com, you can go to the podcast page and you can filter the episodes by category. So, for example, you could go there and click the tab with cycling and you would see only episodes related to cycling. And this episode would show up there, for example, and other cycling related episodes. The same goes for swimming, running, and racing, a number of categories there. So it's super easy to find episodes on topics that interest you and just search really easily and see what might be of interest from the archives. So go and check that out. That's on the podcast page on scientifictriathlon.com. On Thursday, we have another Q&A coming out, and next Monday, I interview Dr. Inigo San Milan. So that is a super exciting interview. To me, that's one of the best interviews, I think, from the entire year of 2020. Certainly one of the ones that I've been the most fascinated by and learned a lot from. So I am excited about it. I hope that you join me for that discussion next week. And if you haven't heard already, if you're not listening to Q&As regularly, you might not have heard because this is the first Monday episode. But we are running a scientific triathlon training camp next April, the 10th to 17th of April on Mallorca. There will be a super fun week with high quality training for all levels of athletes, whether you are a beginner or a Kona podium finisher. There will be people there that you can train with. There will be coaching there for you to help you at your individual ability. There will be lots of coaches there, by the way, so that there's plenty for everybody to go around. It's a great chance, of course, to meet us scientific triathlon coaches in person. And we are doing the camp in collaboration with Next Level Camp, which is Frank Jacobsen, who you might have heard before on this podcast, a Danish coach, but living in Mallorca. And the reason for that is, Frank is a great guy, but also they have super good handle on all the logistics side of things, having had thousands of athletes through their organizing camps on Mallorca. So all the logistics will be taken care of. They have the contacts to the hotel and to guides. So we'll have plenty of guides to have different cycling groups for different speeds and so on. It just makes it a super good training camp experience where really you will be missing nothing. So go and check out all the information on our website or directly to scientifictriathlon.com/camp. And you can apply there. There are still 10-15 places left. So apply quickly. They will sell out, that's for sure, but there's still room to get in. We also have COVID-19 refund policies in place. So if it's not possible to travel due to COVID-19, then you will be refunded at 100%. Do check the specifics of that, but they are very extensive, very, very good policies. So our goal is that it should be a risk-free. You should be able to sign up without any risk of it being cancelled for COVID-19. But we are very confident that the camp will go ahead. So it shouldn't be an issue. Big thanks finally to our sponsors, Precision Hydration, that you can find on precisionhydration.com. Remember that this week through Cyber Monday, midnight next Monday, they are running a special campaign, so you can get 20% off all electrolyte supplements with the code TTSFriday20. And thank you to Roka that you can find on roka.com. Check out all their sales products. Start your Christmas shopping now. And you can find some really big discounts there for sure. But if there's something that is less than 20%, then go through roka.com/TTS and you can use the discount code there to get the usual 20% off those products. But keep in mind that code cannot be combined with products already on sale. Thank you, as always, for listening. Keep training smart and keep loving triathlon.